Hello everyone, James O'Reilly and Siobhan Ashby here to take you through your federal budget update for 2022. As always, there's tons to get through. It's very late. There's a general advice disclaimer, which is on the screen right now. Please read it in your own time. Let's get started.
James, I'd like to start by talking about individuals. So there's been a few initiatives to cover off individuals. The first is a lower middle income tax offset. So there's a $420 cost of living tax offset, which is pegged to be paid from 1 July. So to confirm, this is a one-off payment to subsidise the cost of living. There's also a lower middle income tax offset boost for another 12 months. So what this means is that eligible earners earning up to $126,000 per annum may receive up to an additional $420 back at tax time. Onto allocated pensioners, the minimum required pension payments drawdown is set to continue to be halved until the end of the next financial year. So currently, that was an initiative that came in from COVID that was supposed to stop at 1 July 2022. It's now set to stop 1 July 2023. A little better, good initiative when people don't want to be drawing on their capital at this time. Capital preservation's a pretty front of mind for people after COVID. Onto welfare recipients. There's a one-off payment of $250 in the coming weeks, but funnily no change to job seeker payments. So materially, other than this one-off $250 payment, there's actually no benefits, which
That is a tank of fuel right now.
really sucks, frankly, because inflation is a real problem in Australia at the moment, and it's actually forecasted a little under 4.5% for 2022.
And that's the government's forecast.
That's the government's forecast, yeah. So the implication to individuals is that the cost of real living is rising, everything's getting more expensive, and it impacts real wage growth. So if you've had a recent salary increase, it might not actually be as much as you think it is because of the impacts of inflation.
I'd love to talk to you about small business. There have been some policies here that are definitely worth talking about. So the one that I'm going to jump to first is a tax break, and I'm calling it a true tax break of 20% on expenses, predominantly digital expenses. So things that will bring your small business into the digital age: laptops, e-invoicing like Xero, cloud computing, cybersecurity, web design, but critically, also for staff training courses, which
that's good.
I think is a really good initiative, particularly in a period where we have really low unemployment. It can be hard to find the right staff, and being able to train your own staff to do the roles that you need to fit is a great thing.
Absolutely.
It's a great thing for staff. It's a great thing for the economy as a whole. So I'm labeling this a true 20% tax break because if you're a business owner, you might be saying to yourself, but these things are already tax deductible. If I spend money on a laptop for work, I get the deduction. I spend $1,000, I get $1,000 as a deduction. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is that the government is offering if you spend $1,000, a $1,200 deduction, so 120% of the cost.
That's great.
So that's how that true 20% tax break was. It's 20% higher than it was before. Now, I know that that's not a tax offset, that's a tax deduction. And so for most business owners, that's probably going to work out that instead of getting that 20% back in cash, you spend $1,000, you get the $1,200 deduction, you're not getting $200 more money in your pocket. You're probably only getting $50 to $70 in your pocket most of the time. But
it's not bad.
It's better than nothing. Yeah. And I think it's promoting the right areas too. So thumbs up. Subsidies for employers taking new apprentices. Again, this dovetails into the idea that we need skilled workers. Apprentices is a wonderful channel to do that. So there are some particular areas where our subsidies are going to be higher, but I think this is net good. It's a good policy and it should be maintained. Now let's talk about the shit stuff. Temporary full expensing, not extended. And this jargon way of saying it, temporary full expensing, is describing something that was set up a few years ago by the coalition, whereby if you, as a business owner, they were trying to encourage that we all spend money as business owners, I beg your pardon. And so they said, well, if you want to buy a laptop, for instance, in the past, if you spend $3,000 on that laptop, you can't just get a tax deduction for it in year one. You actually have to write that off over its usable life, which means that the tax benefit gets lagged. And they said, well, actually bring that forward. And so when you purchase something, even if its usable life is over many years, you can get an immediate tax deduction for it. Now, that was something that they've just continued to roll over. Every budget they've said, we'll extend that for another year, we'll extend that for another year. But this year, niente. They've said that's enough. So the implication here is that if the coalition get elected, and then if they keep their electoral promises, which so we're drawing a long line here, but if those things happen in succession, and then you, as a small business owner, if you want to make purchases, you should start planning to try to make those purchases before June the 30th, 2023, because otherwise you're probably going to get an inferior tax outcome in terms of your cash flow. Yeah. And the last point here is around skilled migration. I've written down where the bloody hell are they? Because when you have, as a small business owner myself, the employment shortages are a problem. It's hard to find good people. And a way that is fixed is through migration. Migration has a lot of other benefits, of course, particularly for skilled migration. You are you're essentially increasing income tax. You're creating more competition in the overall sector. It's a good thing. And the government has in this budget has tracked the target of 160,000 skilled migrants. But that is exactly the same as their target was pre-COVID.
No change.
Yeah, no change. and that sucks. It should be higher. I just can't understand why they wouldn't have made that number higher and encouraged that we have more skilled migrants coming to the country, which is better for the economy as a whole. So disappointing in my eyes. And
strange.
Yeah, it's a strange policy.
Quite strange. There's been a few new policies that have come in for new homeowner schemes. So I'd like to just address those now. Firstly, there's the first home buyer scheme. That was set at 10,000 places per annum, and it's now increased to 35,000 places per annum.
Cool.
So what it means is that under eligibility conditions, there's only a 5% mortgage required with no lender's mortgage insurance paid.
Confirming 5% deposit required.
5% deposit. So contextually, what that means is that for most home purchases in Australia, you need a 20% deposit, otherwise you need to pay LMI, which is essentially the bank's way of protecting themselves.
Money in the bin.
It's lost money, absolutely lost money, and it costs tens of thousands of dollars. So to be able to only have a 5% deposit and save the money and the time in getting the additional 15 and then saving potentially tens of thousands of dollars in LMI is really substantial, actually. So that's good. Moving on to regional housing scheme. This is actually a new scheme that's just being introduced by the government now, very similar to the first home buyer scheme in the parameters in terms of the only 5% deposit required, but this is unsurprisingly for regional housing. So there's the eligibility criteria here is that you essentially need to have a new home, and it's designed to boost the regional economy, which should be quite good after COVID.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good policy.
It is a good policy. The Family Home Guarantee Scheme is the next one up. I actually think that this is a really great scheme. I really like this one. There's an additional 5,000 places added per annum, and this scheme is actually designed to assist single parents who are either first home buyers or are trying to re-enter the property market in buying a home. Homeowners or prospective homeowners struggle to buy a home with property prices being what they are. So to help single parents is a really, really good thing, I think. So here you only need a 2% deposit required with no LMI. Strangely, there are some really strict conditions around this.
But you need a PhD to understand.
You need a PhD, as well as the cost of pricing in Melbourne and certainly Australia is well and truly above generally
some of
these rules. So how many people it will help is contentious, but good initiatives nonetheless. Onto the downsides here, it doesn't solve any housing affordability concerns.
No.
It's done nothing.
Not a peep.
Nothing about the rising housing prices. CoreLogic has reported that Australia's median house price has gone up 20% in the last 12 months. So that's pretty astronomical. And very unsurprisingly for a coalition government, there's no tax breaks for property investors to give first home buyers a better chance of purchase. So the coalition do love favouring the wealthy, and this is absolutely no exception.
Let's talk about parents. This is some more positive policies that have come through, and particularly, more specifically, for soon-to-be parents or prospective parents. If we think about the landscape right now, we've got 18 weeks of maternity leave available and then 2 weeks of paid paternity leave available. And the scheme that's being proposed is to wipe that and just have a much simpler 20 weeks of shared parental leave.
So much better.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So the benefit of this is that it allows more flexibility for a couple to say, well, maybe it's better for the father to take more time off and look after the baby, or maybe it's better for the mother, or maybe it's better to have a hybrid and do 10 weeks each or whatever, and you can share that. That's a great benefit. It actually adds a sneaky 2 weeks for a single parent too, because previously you have 18 weeks of maternity leave, but now you get 20 weeks of shared parental leave that you're all using yourself.
That's fantastic.
So that's cool.
Yeah.
More flexibility around how leave is taken, I think, is an awesome thing. It's in an area that we're seeing some really positive development. At both the women's end, in the sense of not necessarily having to impact their careers in ways that they don't want, and also for men in the sense that they have the ability to spend more time with children. Yeah. Very, very pleasingly, they've also made changes to the household income threshold. So in the past, the primary carer, whoever that designated person was, they needed to have an income under $151,000, and if they didn't have an income under that, they actually weren't eligible for the maternity leave payment. Now, 151K is a fairly reasonable income, of course, but notwithstanding that, we often sit down with people in that boat where the money would really make a difference. Yeah. It's going to result in having a much more stress-free time at home, enjoying that really rare, those really rare high quality times you're going to have with your young bub. And so shifting this is a positive thing, and it's a big shift. It's moving it, instead of being about the primary carer, it's just a household view. The household income threshold is going to increase to 350K, which is a much bigger number. And I think it's just reflective of the fact that we want to cater for more people with this scheme. So huge stamp of approval in my mind. I guess the only blemish here that stands out for parental leave is that there's still no sign or word of the 10% superannuation guarantee payments that have been talked about for a long time. Predominantly, it's women that are taking time off work, and the needle might shift in part with strategies like this, but I think it's going to have to shift a long way before we say that that statement isn't true. Yeah,
absolutely.
And knowing that there is a wage gap, and knowing that the flow-on effect is that there's a significant super gap, in my eyes, I think this is something that this should have been taken into account. Yeah. It's actually not that big an expense from a government perspective, so I'm a little disappointed it hasn't been mentioned in the budget.
Yeah. So moving on to fuel costs and renewables. So it's no surprise that fuel costs have just been absolutely through the roof. If you are driving a car anywhere in Australia at the moment, you'll have felt that. So essentially, the government has a levy on fuel that we contribute to every time we fill up, and that's pretty reasonable. It goes to things like our roads and our infrastructure, which we all use, so that's quite important. Money's got to come from somewhere. But at the moment, that levy is approximately 44 cents a litre. So what the government has proposed is that they're going to halve that levy for the next 6 months. So the fuel saving will be approximately 22 cents a litre, which is a little over 10%, 10 to 15% at the moment.
It'll help.
Which will certainly help. It will be a good thing. Now, whilst the government really wants to get a move on and get that implemented within the next couple of weeks, don't expect to be going to your Bowser in the morning and filling up your car with 22 cents a litre cheaper. It's just not going to happen.
It's going to take a few weeks to flow through.
It's going to take a little bit of time to flow through. And moving on to renewables. So there's been just a little under $250 million over 5 years on low emissions technologies pledged, for example, hydrogen. I have a big problem here, which is that there's been no funding for clean energy or electric vehicle projects, which is unsurprising from our government, but it really sucks. I think that with the rising cost of fuel, and in particular, the fact that there's been so many sanctions on Russia at the moment, which is the third largest exporter of fuel in the world, this presented a good opportunity for the government to seek alternative energy solutions. And unfortunately, we completely missed the mark. So I'm personally quite disappointed in that one.
So in summary here, it's a mixed bag, isn't it? It's a weird budget.
It's a really weird budget.
The government they're certainly praying that this works because you've got these big handouts that don't actually make a great deal of sense.
Yeah.
Like these cost of living measures, they're election bribes.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Like it's $8.6 billion. They're all one-off payments. They're done in the next 6 months. But like, hang on, the cost of living is going up. In your own modelling, it says that it's going up and getting worse. So why did you just give us a one-off payment and say that should do the job? We know the answer, of course, because we've got an election in May. So thank you for bribing us, government.
Right. Moving on to some more positive things, the government has pledged some more money into mental health, which I think is really fantastic. So there's been 10 more Medicare subsidised visits to see a psychologist. So that's 20 a year sessions that will be subsidised from 10, which is really, really wonderful. And plus there's been more money to the National Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Plan, which is very important after COVID. So many people have gone through such a tough time. Additionally, women have got a bit of a boost in the budget, which has been very pleasing. Yay us! There's been $1.3 billion pledged to reduce family, domestic and sexual violence, plus funding to promote women in leadership, including supporting women in trades, which I think is really positive.
Mm-hmm. Well, I see you're positive and I meet it with a negative, which is that there's nothing done for social housing measures whatsoever.
So weird.
And this is at a time when housing affordability is considered to be at a really, really serious point. So obviously that doesn't just affect women; that affects people in general. But it's crap that we missed that.
They don't really go together hand in hand, those two, unfortunately.
Not at all.
And to continue on a negative note, why not? There's been depressingly little for environmental measures. So there's been a tiny splash for the Barrier Reef and some Antarctic research, but the Morrison government actually plans to cut climate spending by 35% if returned to power.
All right, well, I'm going to do my best to wind this up on a positive note as best I can, because there actually is something that I do want to acknowledge that I think that they've done pretty well here, and that's that when we think about this budget on a whole, there's a lot of commentary about the magnitude of the debt and how big our debt is as a function of our GDP and just our economy as a whole. I personally think, looking at this budget, what we're missing is that these numbers are actually better than when we predicted they would be 12 and 24 months ago.
$100 billion better.
Yeah, which is
a lot of
plenty.
money.
Yeah, it's a great outcome. Now, if we think back to previous budgets, particularly that COVID budget, which was about 18 months ago, the government were torn apart about throwing so much money at the economy, and all of the criticism was centered around saying, well, you can't just expect to throw, the economy's it's not thriving. You can't just throw money at it and it just gets off the canvas and takes off again. But 18 months later, we're having these conversations about wage growth, and we're having conversations about, incredibly low unemployment, and we're having and that's actually what's happened with it. There's been a truckload of money thrown at the economy, and it's actually been stimulated, not entirely just because of that money, of course, but
it's helped.
It's helped a lot, And so, in that sense, I think there probably needs to be some acknowledgement that the economic policy that they did put into force during COVID was at this point actually transpired to be pretty sound. Again, at this point, from what we can see right now, debt levels are obviously horrible. There's no optimism for me about those, but the outlook is more positive than it was in the last budget, and it's also framed. If you look in sort of under the hood, it's framed on some very, very conservative commodity prices. Commodity prices have spiked considerably since the Russia-Ukraine turmoil, and because of that, if we assume that those commodity prices continue, there's massive amounts more revenue to come through. But the government has intentionally taken a long-term average on all of those commodity prices, which is in a lot of cases about 50% of what the actual commodity price is right now. So if those numbers stay true, there's going to be a better outcome still on the back of that.
That's all from us. Thank you so much for watching. As always, you're welcome to get in touch with either James or myself if you have any questions. And
let's go to bed.
Let's go to bed. Good night, Australia.